Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?
Kenya yet again finds itself in the middle of a controversial and disputed electoral process that has divided the country along ethnic lines. One man is at the center of all these. Deputy President William Ruto talks to Al Jazeera. Deputy President William Ruto, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. Are you concerned that under the collective watch of you and President Uhuru Kenyatta, that we are witnessing the most division and ethnicity in Kenya?
In fact, it is to the contrary. I think for the first time in a long while, Kenyans are coming together. If you look at the last election, if that is anything to go by, on 8th of August, there were basically two formations, unlike the ethnic divides that we have had in the past. Slowly, Kenyans are beginning to appreciate political parties and political formations that go beyond their ethnic arena. And that is why in the last election, we had basically two formations. One under Jubilee, the other under our competitors in NASA, signifying that there is a move by the people of Kenya to appreciate not ethnic groupings, but political parties. And if you look at what happened with Jubilee, which is one party, and for your information, we have made a deliberate attempt, and by the grace of God, we have succeeded in trying to formulate a party that brings all communities, many regions of our country into one political formation. It has never happened that one political party can be voted in 41 counties,
Mr. Deputy President,
signifying that there is an appreciation by Kenyans that we can belong to a party irrespective of the communities we come from, the faith we profess, the regions we come from. We can engage
that is
and
more
move together
about
as
how
Kenya.
successful your party has been. But doesn't the acrimony, the divisions we are seeing, and the disputed elections, actually twice within 3 months, say a lot about your leadership too?
It says a lot about our democratic credentials. It demonstrates that Kenya is progressively becoming a stable, progressive, democratic state that appreciates that we can have differences of opinion. That does not necessarily become a division, as you want to call it, but it is the fact that we have differences of opinion, and we have built institutions that manages our engagement, both at the personal level, at the collective level, as political parties, as individuals. And for your information, in fact, the fact that Kenya is becoming the first country in Africa for a presidential election to be repeated, right? It has never happened. This is the first time a presidential election has been nullified. And all our institutions, from the judiciary through to the legislature, are holding. In fact, Thursday was historic on 26th, that we actually managed to deliver a rerun or a repeat presidential election, which was unfortunately boycotted by the opposition. And they had good reason why they boycotted, because it was obvious, the writing was on the wall. They had lost the election on 8th of August. They were going to lose the election again, as they did.
You surely can't be proud of a process, that process that you say happened on the 26th, which was marked by widespread violence, intimidation of voters, people being turned away from polling stations, and police shooting young people point blank. and killing them.
There is two sides to what happened on the 26th. Number one, we proved, and that is the part I'm proud about, we proved as the people of Kenya that it doesn't matter how powerful you imagine you are, it doesn't matter how important you think you are or your political party is. It is not your whims that will decide the destiny of Kenya. It is the Constitution of Kenya. In fact, the biggest winner on 26th of August, when we repeated the presidential election, was not necessarily Uhuru Kenyatta and myself. It was the Constitution of Kenya. Where was violence? It was in mostly Migori, Kisumu, Homa Bay, Siaya, largely the backyard of Mr. Odinga. And this violence was not spontaneous. This was organized violence. And the violence was supposed to prevent election officials and materials from getting to polling stations so that the people of that region can vote. Mr. Odinga knew for sure that if these election materials got to the polling stations, as it did in two constituencies in Nyanza, you know that very well, in those two constituencies where in Muhoroni and in Kisumu Town West, where election materials got to the polling station, people voted. And that is what Mr. Odinga did not want, because he had announced and failed that there will be an election boycott. Unfortunately for him, 7.7 million, approximately, Kenyans turned up, woke up in the morning, and went and voted, because they were following the dictates of the Constitution, not the whims of an individual.
Why are the same questions being raised about the rerun, just as they were raised on the August 8 elections? Some people are concerned that Jubilee Party and some election officials are tinkering with the numbers to try and make up for the very low turnout that we witnessed.
Forget about the numbers we have from our agents as Jubilee. Forget about the numbers that the Electoral Commission has from their infrastructure. Independent media have sent their own numbers. They are on the TV screens. Independent of the IEBC, independent of any political party, independent press. And if there is one thing we are proud of in this country, is our independent media. Independent media send their own reporters to every tallying center in Kenya. There are only 290. And they have tallied the results, and they are matching with the results we have, and they are matching with the results the election body has. What we are witnessing is estimates that were given initially, being now said, oh, you estimated 6.5. Why is it 7.7? When somebody says it is estimated, what does that mean? I think it's just a question of language. So I don't think there is any tinkering with numbers. The reality is that people of Kenya voted, and there are some people who are surprised that actually so many Kenyans stand up. And for the record, in Nairobi, for example, more people voted for Jubilee, President Uhuru Kenyatta and myself in Nairobi than they did in August 8th.
Now, you just a little while ago said that it's the Constitution that's supreme in Kenya, and it's what the Constitution says.
Absolutely.
The media has not been assigned by the Constitution to collect election data for their own use, yes, but not for official purposes. It's the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission says 33% turnout. You're saying 7.7 million people voted for Jubilee. The numbers don't add up there, right?
My friend, your figure of 33% did not come from the Electoral Commission. I have been following this process very keenly because I'm an interested party. The Electoral Commission gave an indication of 48% turnout according to the numbers that they had about 3 days ago. They have kept on revising those numbers as they receive additional information from the field.
They kept lowering it.
And
they kept lowering the number.
They didn't keep lowering. That was an estimate. And you see, if you have an estimate, what does it tell you about an estimate? They estimated 6.5 million. The figures have gone up to 7.2 million. The percentage turnout has come down from 48 to about 40%, basically because of the numbers and the turnout. And those are just numbers. And my friend, numbers never lie.
Let's talk about the issue of the turnout.
Yeah.
It's nowhere near the August 8 elections.
Correct.
Which means even if I take your number of 40% turnout, 60% of registered voters in Kenya did not participate in that election. That raises huge legitimacy issues if you are to be sworn in. How are you going to wade through that?
79% turned out on 8th of August. When all the candidates were on board, there was no boycott, there was no intimidation, there was no violence. With all the violence that we have said, with all the intimidation, with all the blackmail, with militia unleashed by Mr. Odinga on parts of our country not to vote, 9% of our country not to vote, between 40 and 41% of Kenyans turned up, which tells you only about 36% of Kenyans who turned up in August did not turn up this time. When you talk about turnout and you compare with what happens elsewhere, 41%, my friend, is very respectable. Legitimacy is not a function of perception. Legitimacy is a function of constitutional provision. A legitimate government is formed in Kenya when a candidate garners 50+1% of all cast votes. We have 98%, not 50+1. So insofar as the Constitution is concerned, we have won this election fair and square. This election is done and dusted.
But still, a huge chunk of the population of this country did not participate in that process. How are you going to account for them and also ensure that they are not excluded? Because this is a country that has a history of exclusion of different communities, which has always proved a problem.
Unlike other countries where it is mandatory to vote, in Kenya, it is choice. You can vote or not vote. In fact, many of the Kenyans that did not vote, it is not true that they didn't participate in the election. They participated in the election, but they elected not to vote. It is a choice in the Constitution. So, in fact, every Kenyan participated in this election. There was an option for every Kenyan to vote who is registered. There are those who chose to vote, 7.7 million. There are those who chose not to vote, and that is also participation in an election. Yeah. There are those who are persuaded by the opposition to abstain or to withdraw from, to boycott the election. That is also a choice. Lastly, it is not possible anymore for any part of Kenya or any group in Kenya to be marginalized. Our Constitution robustly addresses matters of inclusion.
You're talking about what is on paper and not what is actually happening.
Let me tell you what actually is happening. Every part of Kenya today, through the devolved system of government, it is not possible anymore to marginalize any part of Kenya.
And why is it we have had the loudest cries of self-determination and secession for all those who are unhappy this time more than ever before?
If you say the only time I will agree that there is inclusion is if I am the one included. That's not the Constitution. You know, there is a big problem with people who believe falsely that they can override constitutional provisions because they have supporters or because they are important. But slowly, they are beginning to realize that the Constitution and the people of Kenya are supreme. In this election, that reality dawned on Mr. Odinga. when he thought that by withdrawing from the election, he would change the constitution just by simply withdrawing. There is no provision for this election being held outside 60 days. I have heard him say it is going to be held in 90 days. There is nowhere in the constitution. And soon he will begin to realize that it may be important, he may think it's important, but it is the people of Kenya that are supreme. And it is the Constitution of Kenya that is supreme. No individual, no person can override the provisions of our Constitution.
Absolutely. And some might say that to you as well.
Yes, yes.
Mr. Deputy President, Raila Odinga says, and has said it so many times, that the Supreme Court found a fault with the election and cancelled it. And it's the same Electoral Commission that bungled up the election that was again tasked with the same responsibility, and that he wasn't confident in the process and asked for reforms, which you refused. Why?
Under our Constitution, the Electoral Commission is an independent institution. It doesn't report to government, it doesn't report to the opposition, it doesn't report to this party or that party or this group or the other. So, in our very honest opinion, the so-called irreducible minimums were actually an avenue for our competitors to run away from imminent defeat that was facing them in the repeat elections.
Your opponents say that this is all about you and your ambition to become the president of Kenya in 2022, and a pact 5 years ago with President Uhuru Kenyatta that you give him 10 years in office and he gives you 10 after that.
The presidency of Kenya, the leadership of Kenya, can never be a negotiation by individuals.
You have ambitions.
It is the people of Kenya who will ultimately decide their leadership, from president to the people in the village.
And you have ambitions for 2022.
You see, we do one thing at a time. What is at stake at the moment is for our party. We've worked so hard to put this party together. And we've put this party together painstakingly because we value this country. And we have seen the ethnicity, the ethnicization of politics in Kenya that almost cost us Kenya. We almost lost this country in 2008 because of ethnic politics. And Kenyans, by their nature, want a united country. They don't want ethnicity. But politicians, chasing narrow parochial ambition, have dismembered the country. I am very proud that we have been able to bring Kenya together. Matters of 2022, we will decide when that time comes.
Now, the rerun elections.
Yes.
A disgruntled voter could take it back to the courts, or even Raila Odinga could be collecting the evidence he needs to present to court to try and get fresh elections, as he says he's going to agitate for. How much confidence do you have in the judiciary?
Whether I like or not, whether the next person likes or not, the judiciary have a job to do. They are an independent institution. The Constitution says if there is a challenge to a presidential election, it goes to the Supreme Court. There is no option. There is no option for us. There is no option for those who want to challenge this election. So we will meet again at the Supreme Court.
Both you and President Uhuru Kenyatta criticized the Supreme Court.
Yes, we did.
And President Uhuru Kenyatta went a step further, calling them wakora, which is thugs. You, to quote one of your speeches, you said, they've had their day, our day is coming. And you've promised reforms in the judiciary. How would you like to reform it?
What we said is we will revisit this issue.
How?
And we will revisit this issue in this manner. People voted on the 8th of August. When the Supreme Court annulled the presidential election, there was no mention of how many votes we got and our competitors got. The question we want answered, and it will be answered someday, is did we win the election on 8th of August or did we not? That is the question we will revisit. And we are going to ask for a recount. Because every other argument was made. Oh, there was this form that was not filled. There was that form that was not signed. There was another form, I don't know what, that it was not stamped. There was some server that was not opened. I don't know, a very, convoluted argument. But we were told by the Supreme Court, numbers don't matter. Processes matter. But our argument is, how can you penalize a voter who has gone to the ballot box, marked and made a decision, and then because of the mistakes of others, either by not filling this form or by not stamping that form, you actually overturn the decision of the voter, because ultimately the people are supreme, and their supremacy is exercised in the decision they make in a ballot box.
This is a deeply divided nation as of now. If and when you are sworn in, how do you want to fix that? How do you want to bring Kenyans together in unity once again?
We are divided politically. We are not divided as a people. Yeah? And there is a mechanism of fixing politics, right? When this election is over, Kenya becomes one. Whatever government is doing at the county level, they will do their job. Whatever we will be doing at the national level, we will do our job. And we will ensure, as we have done in the last 4.5 years, and as any other government will do, we will ensure that every part of Kenya belongs.
Mr. Raila Odinga says he has turned his National Super Alliance coalition into a resistance movement, a peaceful resistance movement, as he puts it. There will be demonstrations, there will be mass action. How will you deal with that?
It's really tragic that this so-called big announcement that Mr. Odinga was going to make was to turn a political party into a resistance militia that he says will engage in civil disobedience.
You, 10 years ago, were on the other side, and right beside Raila Odinga, and at the height of the post-election unrest, were calling for mass action to achieve what you had called your stolen victory then. He's just doing what you've done before.
People learn from history. They say it is only fools who learn from their own mistakes. We've been there as a country. Anybody who has not learned from our mistakes in the past and repeat them, they are fools.
So you've moved from that.
I mean, if anybody who is intelligent must not repeat what happened before.
Are you ready to dialogue with your opponents?
Kenya is a very open society. Dialogue is a continuous process in Kenya. What we must, however, be careful about is something called dialogue that is aimed at scuttling the constitution of our country.
Are you and President Uhuru Kenyatta ready to sit down with Raila Odinga and talk about the way forward, how to bring Kenya together?
We are prepared, willing and ready to engage with Raila Odinga, just as we are ready to engage with every other Kenyan to discuss the future of our country.
Deputy President William Ruto, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Jazeera.
My friend, thank you.
Mohammed Adow also speaks with Kenya's opposition leader, Raila Odinga.
Your opponents describe you as a sore loser, a man who never accepts defeat. How will you react to that?
On the next episode of Talk to Al Jazeera.